"You deserve someone better," Daniel Carter said, sliding the divorce papers across the long dinner table in front of 200 guests. "But I deserve someone who belongs in my world." His mother lifted her champagne glass and smiled, as if her son had just announced a promotion. The whole room went silent, and the quiet wife everyone had spent 5 years mocking, the woman they called plain forgettable temporary, picked up the pen and signed her name without a single tear. Before we go any further into this story, please subscribe to the channel and stay with me all the way to the end, because you will not believe how this turns out. And leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from right now so I can see just how far this story has traveled tonight. Sophia Bennett set the pen down on the table with a soft, deliberate click, and for one long moment, nobody in that grand dining room seemed to breathe. She did not look at the papers again. She had already read them twice that afternoon alone in the quiet of the guest room upstairs, while Victoria's caterers argued about the placement of the seafood tower. There was nothing in those pages she did not expect. She had known this was coming for weeks. A woman learns to read her husband the way she reads weather. She had watched the storm building, and Daniel for months had felt the cold front move in every time his mother whispered in his ear. And she had told herself over and over that maybe she was wrong, that maybe the man she married was still somewhere underneath all of it. Now she had her answer. "Well," Victoria Whitmore said, breaking the silence with the light, satisfied tone of a woman who had gotten exactly what she wanted. "That was far less dramatic than I feared. Thank you, Sophia. Truly, you've handled this with more grace than I expected from someone of your background." Someone of your background. Sophia had heard that phrase or some version of it at every family gathering for 5 years. She let it land and slide off her like it always did. "Mother?" Daniel murmured, a flicker of something crossing his face. Not guilt, not quite. More like the discomfort of a man who wanted the messy part to be over. "What?" Victoria said. "I'm being kind. I'm complimenting her." She turned to the nearest guests, a senator's wife and a real estate developer whose name Sophia could never remember, and lowered her voice into the kind of stage whisper meant to be heard by everyone. "Between us, this has been coming for years. Daniel needs a partner who can stand beside him at events like this. Someone with poise, someone with connections. You understand?" The guests nodded because they always nodded. Sophia stood. She did it slowly, smoothing the front of her simple dark dress, the one Victoria had glanced at earlier and called sweet in its way. She picked up her small handbag, and she looked at Daniel, really looked at him the way she had looked at him the night his first company almost went bankrupt, the night he cried in her arms at 2 a.m. and swore he would never forget who stood beside him when he had nothing. "Do you remember," Sophia said quietly, "what you told me the night the bank called in your loan?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Sophia, don't." "You told me I was the only real thing in your life." Her voice did not shake. That was the strange part. The part that made a few guests shift uncomfortably in their seats. There was no anger in it, just a terrible clear calm. "You held my hand and you said whatever happens we build it back together. Do you remember that?" "That was a long time ago," he said. "It was 3 years ago. People change." "Yes," Sophia said. "They do." Victoria clicked her tongue, impatient now. "Must we do the sentimental performance? It's done. It's signed. Sophia, dear, I've had the driver bring your things down. They're in the front hall. We wouldn't want anything to be forgotten." And there it was, the final small, deliberate cruelty. They had packed her belongings before she had even signed. They had been so certain, so sure the quiet housewife would simply fold the way she always folded, the way they assumed a woman like her must always fold. Sophia looked at the row of faces. The politicians, the developers, the old money families who had spent 5 years treating her like a serving girl who had wandered too close to the head table. Not one of them met her eyes. Not one of them had ever bothered to ask her a real question about herself. In 5 years of dinners, galas, weddings, funerals, not a single one of these people had asked what she did, what she thought, what she dreamed about at night. They had never asked because they had already decided she was no one. "I'll say only one thing," Sophia said, "and then I'll go." The room waited. "I hope one day," she said, "you understand what you lost." Daniel almost laughed. It escaped him before he could stop it, a short dismissive sound, the sound of a man who believed he had just traded up. "I understand exactly what I'm losing," he said. "I'm losing the anchor that's been holding me back. No offense meant, Sophia. You're a good person. You're just not built for this life." "No," Sophia agreed. "I'm not built for this life." And she walked out. She did not slam the door. She did not cry in the hallway. She stepped past the neat little pile of her belongings, a suitcase and 2 cardboard boxes, and she left every bit of it exactly where it sat, because none of it mattered, because a woman who owns 9 homes on 3 continents does not need the sweaters Victoria Whitmore's staff had folded for her out of spite. The heavy front doors closed behind her. And parked at the bottom of the marble steps, engine humming, was a car that did not belong to the world Daniel thought he understood. A young woman in a crisp charcoal suit stepped out of the back and opened the door. "Mrs. Bennett," she said, "everything went as expected." "Exactly as expected, Emily," Sophia said, sliding into the seat. Emily Ross got in beside her tablet, already glowing in her hands. She had been Sophia's chief of staff for 6 years, had flown with her through 3 market crashes and 1 hostile takeover, and she had never once in all that time seen her employer look anything less than composed. But she had also watched Sophia disappear for 5 years into a small, ordinary house with a small, ordinary man, and she had never fully understood why. "Are you all right?" Emily asked, and this time it was not a professional question. Sophia looked out at the mansion as the car pulled away. "I gave him 5 years," she said softly. 5 years of my one life to find out if a man could love me without knowing what I was worth. And tonight, I got my answer in front of 200 people. Sophia. "It's fine, Emily." She turned from the window, and something in her had changed. Some door had quietly closed. "It's actually fine. I needed to know. Now I know." Emily hesitated, then handed over the tablet. "There's something you need to see. It couldn't wait." Sophia looked down at the screen, and whatever softness had been in her face a moment before, whatever grief folded itself away and was gone. Because on that screen was the collapsing balance sheet of Whitmore Industries, and for the first time in 5 years, Sophia Bennett was no longer inclined to save it. The story of how Sophia Bennett ended up married to Daniel Carter is not the story most people would guess. She did not fall for his money because he had very little when they met. She did not fall for his family name because at the time the Whitmore name meant almost nothing outside of a few social pages. She met Daniel at a small business seminar he was teaching for free at a community college back when he was still hungry, still humble, still the kind of man who stayed after class to help a nervous young entrepreneur understand cash flow. He had not known who she was. That was the entire point. By then, Sophia Bennett had already built and quietly controlled Aurelia Global Holdings for nearly a decade. She had inherited a modest logistics company from her father at 23 and turned it through a series of moves the financial press still studied into a technology and investment empire that touched shipping, energy, semiconductors, and half a dozen industries most people never thought about. She was, by the time she was 30, one of the wealthiest self-made women in the country, and almost no one knew her face. She had made sure of that. She used holding companies and blind trusts. She let other executives take the public spotlight. She lived when she chose to, as Sophia Bennett, a plain private woman who worked in consulting from home. And she had done it for one reason. Every man she had ever dated before Daniel had found out, and every single one of them had changed the moment they knew. The way they looked at her changed. The way they touched her changed. She stopped being a person and started being an amount. She stopped being someone to love and started being something to acquire. So when she met a struggling young man who helped her with a spreadsheet and never once asked what she drove or where she lived, she made a decision that her own board of directors would have called insane. She let him believe she was ordinary. She married the ordinary version of her life. She cooked dinner. She kept a small house. She wore simple dresses. And she watched with a hope she never fully admitted even to herself to see whether Daniel Carter would love the woman, not the fortune. For the first 2 years, she thought she had won. And then Daniel's small company started to grow, and Sophia from the shadows made sure it grew. An anonymous investor appeared at exactly the right moment. Key contracts fell into place. A crippling debt was quietly absorbed by a firm no one could quite trace. Whitmore Industries, which Daniel had renamed after taking control of a struggling family business, went from nearly bankrupt to comfortably profitable in the space of 18 months, and Daniel Carter began to believe he was a genius. That was when his mother reappeared in his life. Victoria Whitmore had abandoned Daniel and his father years earlier when there was no money and no status to be had. Now with the company rising, she came back full of advice and ambition, and the very first thing she did was look across the dinner table at Sophia and decide that her son had married beneath himself. "She's holding you back, darling," Victoria would say. "You need a wife with reach, with social capital, not a little homemaker who won't even come to events." Sophia had heard every word. She heard it through walls and over phone lines and in the pauses that grew longer every year in her marriage. And she watched, heartbroken and quietly furious, as the man who once helped strangers with their cash flow slowly turned into a man who was ashamed of his own wife. She could have stopped at any time. She could have revealed herself with a single phone call. She could have walked into one of Victoria's galas as the majority owner of half the sponsors in the room. But that would have proven nothing, because the moment they knew everything would have changed, and she would never again be certain whether they loved her or her money. So she waited. She gave him every chance. She waited for one moment, one single moment, when Daniel would choose her over his mother's ambition, when he would stand up at one of those poisonous dinners and say, "This is my wife, and I love her exactly as she is." That moment never came. Instead came the divorce papers in front of 200 people on the night of Victoria's anniversary. And so, riding away from the mansion with the failing numbers of Whitmore Industries glowing on the tablet in her lap, Sophia Bennett made a second decision. Her board would have called insane, though for the opposite reason. She was going to stop protecting them. Not out of revenge. She told herself that firmly, and mostly she believed it, but out of something colder and clearer than revenge. She was going to let the truth do what she had spent 5 years preventing it from doing. She was going to let Daniel Carter find out exactly what his life had been built on. "Emily," she said quietly, "pull the protection, all of it. The debt facility the supplier guarantees, the credit line through Meridian. Unwind it." Emily's fingers hovered over the tablet. "All of it, Sophia. If we pull the Meridian line, Whitmore misses payroll inside 3 weeks. I know. Thousands of people work there." Sophia was quiet for a long moment. This was the part that had held her back for years. Not Daniel, never Daniel. The people. "The employees stay protected," she said finally. "Draft a plan. Aurelia moves to acquire the whole company before it collapses. We keep the jobs. We keep the factories open. We keep every single worker who had nothing to do with that family's arrogance." Her voice hardened. "But the Whitmores lose control. Completely. Do you understand, Daniel, Victoria, all of them? They walk away with exactly what they gave me tonight." Emily looked at her for a long moment. Then she began to type. "It's going to be a long few weeks," she said. "They have no idea," Sophia said, watching the city lights slide past, "how long the next few weeks are going to be." The next morning, Daniel Carter woke up feeling like a new man. He would remember that feeling later with something close to horror. The memory of standing at his bathroom mirror, straightening his tie, feeling free. He had done the hard thing. He had cut the anchor loose. And today of all days was the day everything would come together, because today he had a meeting that could change the entire future of Whitmore Industries. For 3 months, his people had been chasing an investment from one of the most powerful holding companies in the country. A firm so private that almost no one knew who ran it. A firm whose backing could take Whitmore Industries from a regional player to a national force. Aurelia Global Holdings. Daniel's chief financial officer, a nervous man named Ted Halloran, had brought him the opportunity. Aurelia was interested. Aurelia wanted a meeting. And Daniel, riding the high of his newly simplified life, walked into that glass tower downtown, absolutely certain that the universe was rewarding him for finally taking control. "You look confident," Ted said in the elevator, though his own face was pale. "I feel confident," Daniel said. "This is our moment, Ted. Everything I've worked for, and I did it my way, on my own terms." "On your own terms," Ted repeated faintly. The elevator opened onto a floor so quiet and so expensive that Daniel felt his pulse pick up. This was the world he belonged in. This was the world his mother had always told him he deserved. A composed young woman in a charcoal suit met them at the doors and led them down a long corridor toward a boardroom with glass walls. "Ms. Bennett is ready for you," she said. Daniel barely registered the name. Bennett. It was a common enough name. He was already rehearsing his opening line, already imagining the handshake, the deal, the headline. The young woman opened the door, and at the far end of a long table framed by floor-to-ceiling windows, flanked by half a dozen executives who all rose respectfully when she moved, sat Sophia. Not the Sophia from the dinner table. Not the plain, quiet woman in the simple, dark dress. This Sophia wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than Daniel's car. This Sophia sat at the head of the most powerful room he had ever walked into, and every person in it deferred to her without a word. Daniel stopped so suddenly that Ted nearly walked into his back. "Sophia." His voice cracked on the second syllable. She looked up from a folder unhurried, and there was nothing in her expression but a cool professional calm. "Mr. Carter," she said, "welcome to Aurelia Global." For a moment the room tilted. Daniel actually reached out and touched the back of the nearest chair to steady himself. His mind refused the information. It scrambled for any explanation that would let the ground stay solid beneath his feet. A coincidence, a trick, some prank his ex-wife had arranged, some sad small attempt to embarrass him on the day of his triumph. "What is this?" he said, and he heard the tremor in his own voice and hated it. "What are you doing here? Did you follow me? Is this some kind of—" "Sit down, Daniel," Sophia said. Not unkindly. That was somehow worse. "I don't—" He looked at Ted. Ted would not meet his eyes. "Ted, what is going on?" Ted swallowed. "Daniel, Ms. Bennett is the founder of Aurelia." The words did not fit together. They were the wrong shape. Founder, Aurelia, Bennett, Sophia. "That's not possible," Daniel said. He laughed, and the laugh came out wrong, high and thin. "That Sophia works from home. She does consulting. She cooks dinner. He stopped because everyone in the room was watching him, and something in their faces told him that he was the only person present who did not understand what was happening. Sophia slid a folder across the long table. "Open it," she said. His hands were not steady. He opened it. The first page was a corporate registration. Aurelia Global Holdings. Founder and Chairman, Sophia Bennett. The second page was an ownership summary. Majority shareholder 61%. Sophia Bennett. The third page was a list of subsidiaries, and Daniel's eyes moved down it, and near the bottom, listed among dozens of holdings, was a financing vehicle called Meridian Capital Partners. He knew that name. Meridian was the firm that had saved Whitmore Industries 3 years ago. Meridian was the anonymous investor. Meridian was the reason he still had a company at all. Daniel looked up slowly. "No," he said. "Yes," Sophia said. "No, this is—" His mouth was dry. "You're telling me that you—" "I'm not telling you anything yet," she said. "I'm letting you read." He turned the page again, and this time his own name jumped out at him, and beside it were numbers, and the numbers described the exact structure of the debt that had nearly destroyed his company, and the exact date it had been quietly absorbed, and the exact firm that had absorbed it. All of it traced back through 3 layers of holding companies to the woman sitting calmly at the end of the table. The woman he had divorced in front of 200 people. The woman his mother had called a temporary chapter. "The anonymous investor," Daniel whispered. "Was me," Sophia said. The room was very quiet. "The contracts," he said. "The ones that came through when we were about to fold. The supplier who suddenly extended our terms. The bank that suddenly changed its mind about our loan. Me," Sophia said. "Me and me." Daniel sank into the chair he had been gripping. He did not decide to sit down. His body simply stopped holding him up. "For 3 years. He said, I thought—" He stopped. He could not finish it, because the sentence that wanted to come out was, "For 3 years, I thought I was a genius." And now, in front of a table full of strangers, he was hearing the truth that every single thing he had celebrated as his own brilliance had been quietly arranged by the wife he was ashamed of. "You lied to me," he said. And even as he said it, he heard how weak it was. "I never lied to you, Daniel." Sophia folded her hands on the table. "Not once. You asked me what I did once in the first month we met. I told you I worked in investment consulting from home. That was true. You never asked again. In 5 years of marriage, you never asked me one real question about my work. Not one. So no, I didn't lie to you. I simply let you see me without my money, and I watched what you did with that." "You watched," he repeated. "I gave you a gift," she said, and for the first time, a thread of something raw ran under the calm. "Do you understand that I gave you the one thing no one in your world will ever be able to give you again? I gave you a woman who loved you when you were nothing, who married you when you had nothing, who asked for nothing. And you stood up in front of your mother's friends and you handed me papers and you said I didn't belong in your world." Daniel opened his mouth. "Don't," Sophia said. "Don't tell me you didn't mean it. You meant it. You meant every word. You've meant it for 2 years. I watched you mean it a little more every single time your mother whispered in your ear." The mention of Victoria seemed to wake something in him. He grabbed at it like a drowning man grabs at anything that floats. "My mother," he said. "Does she know? Does my father know?" "Not yet," Sophia said. "They'll find out soon enough." "Sophia." His voice changed now. The shock was curdling into something else, into fear, because the numbers on the pages in front of him were not just a personal humiliation. They were a death sentence for his company. "The Meridian line, our operating credit, it's being unwound," Sophia said. "As of this morning." Ted made a small sound. "You can't," Daniel said. "You can't do that. We'll miss payroll. We'll default on Sophia. Thousands of people work for Whitmore. Thousands of families." And there, for just a moment, Sophia's composure flickered, because this was the argument that had held her hostage for 5 years, and Daniel had reached for it not out of concern for those families, but out of concern for himself, and she could see the difference as clearly as she could see him. "Yes," she said softly. "Thousands of families. Funny. You never once mentioned them when you were buying a boat you didn't need. You never mentioned them when you flew your mother to Monaco. You didn't think about a single one of those families when you were spending money that wasn't yours to build a lifestyle to impress people who don't even like you." She leaned forward. "But don't worry about them, Daniel. I'll take care of them. I always have." "What does that mean?" "It means Aurelia is going to acquire Whitmore Industries," she said. "The whole company. We'll keep the factories open. We'll keep every job. Every worker who put in an honest day for you will be safe. The employees don't lose anything." She paused. "The Whitmores lose everything." Daniel stared at her. "You're taking my company," he said. "I'm saving your company," she said, "from you." He shot to his feet. "This is revenge. This is exactly what my mother always said you were. You crawled into my life, you pretended to be nothing. You got your hooks in, and now you're destroying my family." The executives at the table shifted, and one of them, an older man, actually started to rise, but Sophia lifted one hand a half-inch off the table and he settled back. She was not angry. That was the thing Daniel could not understand, and would spend months trying to understand. She was not angry at all. "Sit down, Daniel," she said for the second time. He didn't. "You want to talk about who destroyed your family," she said. "Let's talk about it, but not here." She closed the folder. "Come to the board meeting on Thursday. Bring your mother, bring your father, bring your accountant if you have the nerve, and I will show all of you together exactly who has been destroying Whitmore Industries for the last 3 years. "And who's that?" he said bitterly. Sophia stood. All around the table, the executives stood with her. "It was never me," she said. "The person who's been quietly bankrupting your company, Daniel, is the same person who cared more about looking successful than about actually being a decent man. You'll meet him Thursday." She gathered her things. "He'll be sitting in your chair." She walked toward the door, and then she stopped, one hand on the glass, and she turned back, and for the first time all morning, her voice was not calm at all. It was low, and it was tired, and it carried 5 years of a grief he had never once bothered to notice. "You know the worst part?" she said. "I wasn't going to do any of this. I had a letter written. Before the divorce, I was going to tell you everything, and I was going to offer you a real partnership, the two of us, out from under your mother, building something honest together. I was going to hand you the truth as a gift." She looked at him for a long moment. "You gave me divorce papers first." And she was gone. Daniel stood in that glass room for a long time after she left. Ted said something to him. He didn't hear it. The executives filed out one by one, and none of them looked at him, and he understood in a distant, ringing sort of way that this was what it felt like to become invisible. This was what Sophia had felt at every dinner for 5 years. He took out his phone. His hands were shaking now openly. He called his mother. Victoria answered on the second ring, bright and pleased. "Daniel, how did the big meeting go? Did you charm them? I told you, darling. Doors open when you carry yourself like a Whitmore." "Mother," Daniel said, "you have to tell me every detail. Was it that Aurelia group? Your father says they're absolutely enormous. Imagine what their name attached to ours will—" "Mother." His voice broke. There was a pause on the line. "Daniel, what's wrong? What happened?" He looked out the window at a city that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. "It's Sophia," he said. "What about her, Daniel? She's gone. She signed." "It's over, thank God. You don't have to think about her anymore." "No," Daniel said, and he almost laughed again, that same wrong, high laugh. "No, Mother. I'm going to be thinking about Sophia for the rest of my life." He closed his eyes. "She owns them. She owns Aurelia. She owns Meridian. She owns the money that saved us. She owned everything, Mother, the whole time. And you told me to divorce her." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that he thought the call had dropped. "That's not possible," Victoria finally said. And for the first time in Daniel's entire life, he heard fear in his mother's voice. "That little that's not Daniel, that woman cooked dinner. She wore department store dresses. That is not possible." "I've seen the paperwork," Daniel said. "I'm holding it. Her signature, 61%. "Then we'll fight it," Victoria said, and her voice was climbing fast and shrill toward panic. "We'll expose her. She hid her identity that has to be illegal, that has to be fraud. We'll get lawyers, "Mother," Daniel said, "she's pulling our credit line. This morning, we miss payroll in 3 weeks." The phone went silent again, and Daniel Carter, standing alone in a glass room, 70 floors above a city he had thought was his finally understood in the pit of his stomach that the woman he had thrown away in front of 200 people had not walked out of his life at all. She had walked out of his life holding it in her hand. He lowered the phone. His mother was still talking, her voice a small frantic buzz against his earwords about lawyers and reputation and fighting back, and he could not make himself listen to any of it, because underneath the panic and the disbelief, a single memory had surfaced and would not leave him. The night the bank called in his loan, 3 years ago, Sophia at the kitchen table at 2 a.m, holding his hand while he shook. Whatever happens, she had said, we build it back together. He had thought all this time that he had built it back himself. He had never built anything. And on the far side of the city, in a car pulling away from a glass tower, Sophia Bennett set down her phone, looked out the window, and allowed herself for exactly 1 minute to feel the thing she had not let herself feel in that room. Then she put it away, the way she put everything away, and she turned to Emily. "Thursday," she said. "Make sure the whole family is in that room, all of them. I want them to hear it together." Emily nodded slowly. "You know they'll come ready for war." "I'm counting on it," Sophia said. She looked back out at the city. "They spent 5 years deciding who I was," she said quietly. "Thursday I decide." The 3 days before Thursday were the longest of Daniel Carter's life, and every hour of them taught him something he did not want to know. The first thing he learned was how fast the people who loved you when you were rising will start whispering the moment you begin to fall. By Tuesday afternoon, 2 of his largest suppliers had called Ted asking about restructuring rumors. And Daniel understood with a cold twist in his gut that word was already moving through the city. Somebody knew. Somebody always knew before you wanted them to. The second thing he learned was that his mother did not fall apart under pressure. She sharpened. Victoria Whitmore arrived at his apartment Tuesday night with a folder of her own, a lawyer named Grant Pierce on speed dial, and a look in her eye Daniel had not seen since the days she used to fight with his father over money that had already run out. "Fraud," Victoria said, before she had even taken off her coat. "That's the angle. She concealed material information about her identity and her assets during the marriage. That's fraud, Daniel. That's coercion. No judge in this state is going to let a woman hide $1 billion empire from her own husband and then use it to seize his company. We destroy her in the press and we destroy her in court, and by the time we're finished, Aurelia won't touch Whitmore Industries with a 10-foot pole. Mother, Daniel said quietly, Grant thinks we can file an emergency injunction to stop the credit unwind. That buys us time. Time is everything right now. Mother, and your father is calling in every favor he has left, which admittedly isn't many, but... Mother, stop. Victoria stopped. She looked at her son, and for a moment, the campaign general in her softened into something almost human. Daniel, you look terrible. I keep thinking about the letter, he said. What letter? She said she wrote me a letter, before the divorce. She said she was going to tell me everything and offer me a real partnership, and His voice caught. I gave her divorce papers first. Victoria's mouth thinned. She's lying. Of course she's lying. That's exactly what a woman like that would say to make you feel guilty right before she takes everything you have. Don't you dare fall for it, Daniel. Don't you dare let her get inside your head 3 days before the most important fight of your life. And that was the third thing Daniel learned in those 3 days, that some part of him wanted his mother to be right so badly that he was willing to believe her over the evidence of his own eyes. Because if Sophia was lying, then he was a victim. And if Sophia was telling the truth, then he was the man who had thrown away the only real love of his life to impress people who were at this very moment deleting his number from their phones. He chose for 3 more days to believe his mother. He would regret that too. Thursday came gray and early. Daniel put on his best suit, the charcoal one his mother said, made him look like a man in control, and he rode the elevator up to the 70th floor of the Aurelia Tower with Victoria on one side and his father Harold silent and pale on the other. Grant Pierce, the lawyer, carried a briefcase full of everything he believed would save them. They walked into the boardroom 10 minutes early. Sophia was already there. She sat exactly where she had sat before at the head of the long table, and this time she was not alone with faceless executives. This time, there were 2 lawyers seated to her right, and a woman Daniel recognized after a moment as Emily Ross, and at the far end of the room, sitting quietly, with a leather folder in her lap, a silver-haired woman none of them knew. Sit, Sophia said. We have a lot to get through. We won't be sitting, Grant Pierce announced in the booming voice of a man who charged by the syllable. Ms. Bennett, I represent the Whitmore family. I'm here to inform you that we intend to file for an emergency injunction this afternoon to halt any unwinding of the Meridian Credit Facility and to pursue claims of marital fraud and material concealment against you personally. I'd strongly advise you to Mr. Pierce, Sophia said without looking up from her folder. Did the Whitmores tell you what they're paying you? Grant blinked. I don't see how that's... Because I'd hate for you to do all this shouting and then find out the check bounces. She looked up. Whitmore Industries misses payroll in 19 days. The family's personal accounts are cross-collateralized against the company. When it goes, they go. So whatever your retainer was, I'd cash it fast. The room went very still. Grant Pierce's mouth opened and closed. He looked at Victoria. Victoria's face had gone the color of paper. Sit down, Sophia said for the 3rd time in 3 days, and this time all 3 Whitmores sat, and even the lawyer lowered himself into a chair. Daniel found that he could not stop staring at her, not because of the suit or the power or the executives who deferred to her, because of how calm she was. He had lived with this woman for 5 years, had eaten dinner across from her 4,000 times, had slept beside her, and he was realizing now that he had never once seen her in the place where she actually lived. This room. This was who she was, and he had never known it. Before we talk about the company, Sophia said, I want to talk about the concealment. Grant straightened, sensing an opening. Then you admit you hid your assets and identity from your husband during the marriage. I admit I never told Daniel what I was worth, Sophia said. That's true. But I want to be very precise about the word hid, Mr. Pierce, because your clients are about to build their entire case on it. She turned to Daniel. Daniel, when we met, what did I tell you I did for work? Daniel's throat was dry. You said investment consulting from home. Was that true? Yes. In 5 years of marriage, how many times did you ask me a single follow-up question about my job? Daniel said nothing. Say it out loud. I don't remember asking. You didn't ask. Not once. Not the name of a firm, not a client, not a project, nothing. Her voice did not rise. That's not concealment, Daniel. That's not me hiding. That's you not caring. There's a difference, and every person at this table understands it, and so do you. Victoria cut in sharp and desperate. That's a manipulation. You deliberately created an impression. Mrs. Whitmore. Sophia turned to her, and something in her tone made Victoria stop. You called me a temporary chapter at your own dinner table, in front of 40 people. Do you remember that? Victoria's chin lifted. I don't recall my exact... You called me a homemaker who wasn't built for your world. You told your son he deserved a wife with reach. You said it at Thanksgiving and at the Harrington wedding and at your birthday and at 100 smaller moments you thought I couldn't hear. Sophia's eyes were steady. You spent 5 years telling everyone I was nothing, and now you want to stand in a courtroom and argue that I deceived you into believing I was less than I am. A pause. You'll lose that argument, Victoria, because you're the one who wrote it. The silver-haired woman at the end of the table made a small note in her folder. Harold Whitmore, who had not said a word since entering, spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet and gravelly and full of a shame that had been sitting in him for years. Sophia, I'm going to ask you something and I want an honest answer. The investor, Meridian, the one who saved us when the bank pulled out 3 years ago. He swallowed. Was that really you? It was. Why? Harold said. You didn't owe us anything. My wife had already made it clear how she felt about you. Why would you save a company owned by a family that treated you like he couldn't finish it? For the first time, something in Sophia's face gently opened. Because of the workers, Harold, she said. Because there were 1,100 people at Whitmore Industries 3 years ago, and every one of them was about to lose their job over a debt Daniel took on to expand too fast. Machinists, truck drivers, women in the front office who'd been there 30 years. They didn't do anything wrong. They just worked for a family that made a bad decision. She looked at Daniel. So I fixed it, quietly. Because if I'd done it publicly, you'd have known who I was, and I would have lost the one thing I was actually trying to protect. Which was, Harold asked, whether your son could love me for me. The room was silent. And when I did it, Sophia went on, I told myself it was for the workers, and it was. But I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a part of me that did it for Daniel too. Because I loved him. Even when his mother was turning him against me, even when he stopped looking at me at dinner, even when he started leaving the room when I walked in, I loved him, and I thought if I just held everything together long enough, he'd wake up. Her voice was quiet now. He didn't wake up. He handed me papers instead. Daniel closed his eyes. That's very moving, Grant Pierce said, though even he sounded less certain now. But sentiment isn't a legal defense. My clients still have grounds. Emily, Sophia said, the file. Emily Ross slid a thick bound document down the length of the table. It came to rest directly in front of Daniel. Open it, Sophia said. Daniel looked at it the way a man looks at something he already knows is going to hurt him. Then he opened it. The first section was labeled simply Whitmore Industries Discretionary Expenditures last 36 months. I want to talk about who's been bankrupting your company, Sophia said, since your mother's lawyer is so interested in fraud. Daniel turned the first page, and his own life began to unfold in front of him in cold black numbers. The boat, the one he'd told everyone was a smart client relations investment, $400,000 paid from a company account used 11 times in 2 years, mostly for parties. I remember when you bought that, Sophia said quietly. You told me it would pay for itself. It never carried a single client who signed a deal. The trip to Monaco, Victoria's suite at the Hôtel de Paris, the private flight, charged all of it to Whitmore Industries under the category Business Development. That was Mother's idea, Daniel said weakly. I know, Sophia said, but your name authorized it. Page after page, the cars, the art. Victoria had insisted the company purchase to signal stability to investors. The consulting fees paid to a firm that turned out to be owned by one of Victoria's friends and produced, as far as anyone could tell, a single 14-page report. the renovation of the executive floor, the membership at a club that cost more per year than most of Daniel's employees made in 6 months. And underneath all of it, page after page, the debt, the real debt. Not the operating debt Sophia had absorbed 3 years ago, but new debt quietly taken on over the last 18 months to keep funding a lifestyle the company could not afford, hidden in the books under vague line items that Ted Halloran had apparently been too frightened to question. Daniel looked up at his CFO, who had come with them and now sat 2 seats away staring at the table. "Ted," Daniel said, "you knew about this." Ted did not look up. "I flagged it, Daniel, 4 times. You told me to stop being a pessimist." Daniel had no memory of that, which frightened him more than if he had. "So let's be very clear," Sophia said, "about who has been destroying Whitmore Industries. It wasn't the anonymous investor who saved it. It wasn't the quiet wife who worked from home. It was a man who cared so much about looking successful that he spent his company into a hole and blamed everyone but himself." She closed her own copy of the file. "You want to sue me for fraud, Victoria, please, file it. Because the discovery process in that lawsuit will make every page of this document public. All of it. The boat, Monaco, the Friends Consulting Company. Every dollar you spent pretending to be rich while your son's workers went without raises for 3 years." She let it sit. "You really want that in the newspapers?" Victoria's mouth was pressed into a bloodless line. Grant Pierce quietly closed his briefcase, and that was the moment Daniel understood that his mother's war was already over. It had ended before it began. She had walked in with a folder and a lawyer, and Sophia had walked in with the truth, and there had never been any contest at all. "So what do you want?" Daniel said. His voice was hollow. "You brought us all here. You've made your point. What do you actually want, Sophia?" Sophia stood. So did her lawyers. So did Emily. And the silver-haired woman at the end of the table stood too and stepped forward, and for the first time, Sophia introduced her. "This is Margaret Chen," Sophia said. "She's the person Aurelia is appointing to run Whitmore Industries after the acquisition." The word acquisition landed in the room like a stone through glass. "Acquisition," Victoria repeated. "You can't. We won't sell. It's our company. It's our name." "Victoria," Sophia said gently, "the company misses payroll in 19 days. When it misses payroll, it defaults. When it defaults, the bank sees it, and they'll sell it for parts, and every one of those 1,100 workers loses everything. That's not a threat. That's arithmetic. You did that, not me." She nodded toward Margaret. "Aurelia is offering to buy the company before that happens. We keep it whole. We keep the jobs. We keep the factories running. Margaret is one of the best operators in the country, and under her Whitmore Industries survives and even grows." A pause. "But the Whitmore family walks away. No board seats, no control. You keep your personal homes because I'm not interested in putting anyone on the street, even you. But the company is no longer yours." "That's robbery," Victoria hissed. "It's a rescue," Sophia said. "You just don't like who's doing the rescuing." Daniel sat very still, staring at the file open in front of him, at the record of everything he had done. And for the first time in 3 days, he stopped listening to his mother's voice in his head and started listening to the small, honest voice underneath it, the one he had been drowning out for 2 years. That voice said, "She's right." That voice said, "You did this." That voice said, "She is standing here on the day you tried to destroy her, offering to save the jobs of the people you failed, and you called her a temporary chapter." "I'll sign," Daniel said. Victoria's head snapped toward him. "Daniel?" "I'll sign, Mother." His voice cracked. "Look at the file. Look at it. She's not lying. None of it is a lie. I spent the money. I ignored Ted. I let you talk me into buying art and boats while my own workers went without raises. And He stopped. He made himself say it out loud in a room full of people because he understood suddenly that he had spent his whole life never saying the true thing out loud. "And I divorced the only person who ever loved me before I had anything because you told me she wasn't good enough. And I believed you." He looked at his mother, and there was no anger in it, only a terrible exhaustion. "When did I start believing you over her, Mother? When did that happen? Because I can't even find the moment. It just happened a little at a time until one day I stood up at your party and handed her papers. Daniel, you are in shock. You are not thinking clearly. I've never thought more clearly in my life. Victoria stood up so fast her chair rolled back and struck the wall. Fine, sign it. Sign away your father's company. Sign away our name, sign away everything this family built. You didn't build it, Harold said quietly. Everyone turned. Harold Whitmore was looking at his wife with an expression Daniel had never seen on his father's face. You didn't build any of it, Victoria. You left 20 years ago when there was nothing here but debt and a failing plant. You left, and you came back the day the numbers turned green. Sophia's right about that too. She's right about all of it. He turned to Sophia, and his voice shook. I'm sorry. For what it's worth, which I know is nothing now. I'm sorry we didn't see you. I'm sorry my son didn't see you. You saved 1,100 people who never even knew your name. That's a better thing than anyone in my family ever did with all our so-called success. Sophia looked at him for a long moment. Thank you, Harold, she said softly. That does mean something. Victoria was breathing hard, looking from her husband to her son, to the woman she had spent 5 years despising, and the room could see the exact moment she understood that she had lost all three of them at once. You'll regret this, she said, but there was no power left in it. It was the voice of a woman reaching for a weapon that was no longer there. I already regret plenty, Daniel said. He picked up the pen. But not this. He signed the agreement to sell. His father signed beside him. And when it was done, Sophia gathered the documents and the two Aurelia lawyers exchanged a quiet nod, and 1,100 jobs in that single moment went from doomed to safe. But that was not the twist. The twist came when Emily Ross leaned over and murmured something in Sophia's ear, and Sophia's face changed just slightly, and she asked Margaret Chen and the lawyers to step out for a moment, and Grant Pierce, sensing that the legal portion of his day was over, packed up and left, and Ted followed, and then it was only the four of them left in that enormous room, Sophia, Daniel, Harold, and Victoria. There's one more thing, Sophia said, and I wasn't going to say it in front of the lawyers because it doesn't belong to them. She reached into her bag and took out an envelope. It was old. The paper had softened at the corners the way paper does when it's been handled and put away and taken out again many times. Daniel, she said, this is the letter. Daniel stopped breathing. I told you I wrote you a letter before the divorce. Your mother told you I was lying, that I made it up to make you feel guilty. Sophia set the envelope on the table and slid it toward him. I don't want you carrying that doubt for the rest of your life, wondering if it was real. So here it is. I wrote it 3 weeks before your mother's party. It's dated. You can see for yourself. Daniel picked up the envelope with shaking hands. On the front in Sophia's neat handwriting was his name, and in the corner, a date. 3 weeks before the night he handed her divorce papers. Read it, Sophia said. Or don't. That's up to you. I just needed you to know it was real. Daniel opened it. The letter was not long. It was written in the plain, direct way Sophia spoke, and it began, Daniel, I've been carrying something for a long time, and I think it's time I told you the truth. He read that she was not who he thought she was. He read that she had money, a great deal of it, more than he could imagine, and that she had hidden it not to deceive him, but because she had been hurt too many times by men who only saw the number. He read that she had watched him change under his mother's influence, and that it had broken her heart. And then he read the part that stopped his own heart in his chest. She had written, I don't want to leave you. I want to fight for us, but I can't do it in the dark anymore. So here is my plan, and I'm going to give it to you and let you choose. I want to take you away from your mother's world for 1 year. I want to tell you everything and start again as equals with nothing hidden. I want to rebuild the company the right way together and use what I have to make it something we can be proud of. I've never wanted to buy you a life. I've wanted to build one with you. Choose me, Daniel. Not the money. Me. That's all I've ever wanted you to do. At the bottom, she had written, I'll give this to you at your mother's party. I've decided. Whatever you say, I'd rather know than keep living like this. Daniel looked up slowly. You were going to give me this, he whispered. At the party. Yes. You were going to give me this and instead His voice broke completely. I stood up and I divorced you. Before you could even... He couldn't finish. He put the letter down because his hands were shaking too hard to hold it. You came to that party to save us, and I ended it in front of everyone before you ever got the chance to say a word. Yes, Sophia said quietly. And now finally the calm that had held her all morning wavered, and Daniel saw underneath it for just a moment the woman he had married, the woman who had held his hand at 2 a.m, and she was not triumphant, and she was not cruel, and she was not enjoying any of this. She was just sad, deeply quietly sad, the way you are sad about something that can never be undone. So now you know, she said. It was real. All of it was real. I would have given you everything, Daniel. Not the company, not the money, me. And you didn't want it. You wanted your mother's approval more. She picked up her bag. I don't say that to hurt you. I'm past wanting to hurt you. I say it because you asked me 3 days ago who destroyed this family. And the answer is in that letter, in the space between the day I wrote it and the day you tore us apart. She stood. You had a wife who loved you and a plan to save everything. And you gave it all away for a room full of people who won't return your calls anymore. Victoria, who had gone silent, made a small broken sound because she understood at last that she was not just watching her son lose a company, she was watching him understand exactly what she had cost him. And she understood that he would never look at her the same way again. Keep the letter, Sophia said. It's yours. It always was. She walked to the door. Harold rose, and to everyone's shock, he crossed the room and very briefly took Sophia's hand in both of his. You're a better person than we deserved, he said. I hope life is good to you now, truly. Take care of yourself, Harold, Sophia said gently. You're not the one who did this. Then she looked back one last time at Daniel, who was sitting with the letter open in front of him, and tears on his face, a man who had walked into that room to win a war, and was leaving it having lost the only thing that had ever mattered. Goodbye, Daniel, she said. And she was gone, and this time there was no waiting car full of urgent business, no next crisis, no folder of numbers. This time she simply walked out of the Whitmores' lives for good and left them sitting in the ruins of everything they had built on the back of a woman they never bothered to see. For a long time, no one in the room spoke. Then Victoria said in a small voice that had lost all its command, Daniel, say something. Daniel folded the letter with great care, the way you fold something you're going to keep for the rest of your life, and he slid it into his breast pocket over his heart, and he stood. You told me she wasn't good enough for me, he said. Daniel, you told me that at every dinner for 5 years, and I believed you. He looked at his mother and his face was wet, but his voice was steady now, steadier than it had been in years. She was too good for me, Mother. That was the truth the whole time. She was too good for all of us, and you couldn't stand it because a woman like that made you look at yourself and you didn't like what you saw. He picked up his coat. So you convinced me to throw her away, and I let you. That's the part I have to live with. I let you. Where are you going? Victoria said. And now there was real fear in it, the fear of a woman watching the last person in her life walk toward the door. Daniel paused with his hand on the handle. I don't know, he said. For the first time in my life, Mother, I have absolutely nothing left, and no one telling me who I'm supposed to be, and nothing to prove to anyone. He almost laughed, that same broken sound from 3 days ago, but softer now, almost peaceful. You know what's funny? I think that's the most honest I've felt since the night the bank called our loan, since the night she held my hand and said we'd build it back together. He opened the door. She did build it back, he said without turning around. She built all of it. I just never knew. And Daniel Carter walked out of the tower a poorer man than he had walked in poorer by a company, a name, a fortune, and a lie he had told himself for 2 years about who he was. But he walked out holding a letter over his heart, and for the first time in a very long time, he was not performing for anyone at all. The acquisition was supposed to be quiet. That was what Sophia's lawyers advised, and it was what she preferred. A clean private transfer of ownership papers signed behind glass walls, no cameras, no headlines. The workers would keep their jobs. Margaret Chen would step in. The Whitmore name would fade from the building over a few months, the way a name fades from a rented sign. Sophia had never wanted spectacle. She had wanted all along to protect 1,100 people and then disappear back into the private life she preferred. But Victoria Whitmore was not a woman who lost quietly. 10 days after the signing, Emily Ross walked into Sophia's office without knocking, which she never did, and set her tablet on the desk with a look Sophia had learned to read over 6 years. "You need to see this before the gala," Emily said. Sophia looked at the screen. It was a message thread forwarded from a contact on the board of the Hartwell Foundation, the charity hosting the largest philanthropic gala of the season, an event Sophia attended every year, an event where Aurelia was a founding sponsor. The Whitmores had bought a table. "Not just a table," Emily said before Sophia could ask. "Victoria spent the last week working every phone number she has. She's planted a story with 3 columnists, and she's told at least 2 of them that something is going to happen tonight." "What story?" Sophia said. "The story that a scheming woman infiltrated a good family under false pretenses, hid a fortune from her own husband, manipulated him into marriage, and then used her secret money to seize his company out of revenge." Emily's jaw tightened. "She's got a name for you now. She's calling you to anyone who'll listen, the woman who lies for a living." Sophia read the thread twice. When she looked up, her face was very calm, and Emily, who knew her, felt a small chill. "She's going to stand up in front of 600 people and every business reporter in the city and say it to the room," Emily said. "She wants a scene. She wants you to look like exactly what she's calling you. Sophia, we can get you out of tonight. We can send a statement, skip the event, let it blow over. You don't have to walk into a trap somebody built specifically for you." "Let her," Sophia said. "Sophia. Let her stand up. Let her tell her story." Sophia closed the tablet. "She's been telling stories about me for 5 years. She's very good at it, but she's only ever told them in rooms where I wasn't allowed to answer." She stood and walked to the window. "Tonight I'll be in the room. You know what she's going to do. She's going to try to break you in public, in front of cameras. There's no controlling it once it starts. I know exactly what she's going to do," Sophia said. "That's why I'm going to let her start." She turned back. "For 5 years, I sat at her dinner table and swallowed every insult because I'd made a choice not to reveal myself. Every wall in that family had my humiliation whispered behind it, and I never once got to answer Emily. Not once." Her voice was very quiet. "She's about to hand me a microphone. Why on earth would I refuse it?" Emily was silent for a moment. Then she nodded slowly, and something in her expression shifted from worry into something closer to anticipation. "I'll make sure our table is centered," she said, "so the cameras have a clean line." "Thank you," Sophia said, and then almost to herself, 5 years. I've been carrying this for 5 years. Meanwhile, across the city, Daniel Carter had not planned to go to the gala at all. In the 10 days since the signing, he had been living a life that would have been unrecognizable to the man he'd been 3 weeks earlier. He had moved out of the luxury apartment because he could no longer afford it into a small furnished place near the edge of the city with thin walls and a radiator that knocked all night. He had sold one of the cars already and knew the other would have to go soon. He had not spoken to his mother since the day in the tower, and he carried Sophia's letter in his jacket pocket everywhere he went, and read it at night, and each time he read it, the same knife went into the same wound. He was learning things about himself in that small apartment that he did not enjoy learning. He was learning, for one, how few of his relationships had ever been real. He had made a list one sleepless night of every person he'd called a friend in the last 5 years. And then he had gone through the list and asked himself honestly which of them had called since he lost his money. The answer was none, not one. The men he'd taken on the boat, the couples he and his mother had flown to Monaco, the business contacts who had laughed at his jokes and praised his vision, all of them had simply evaporated as if they had never existed, and he understood now that in a sense they never had. Sophia had lived in that world for 5 years, invisible, and had known the whole time exactly how hollow it was, and he had thought she was the one who didn't understand. So when Victoria called him that afternoon, the first call he'd taken from her in 10 days, and said in a voice bright, with a purpose he recognized and dreaded, "Daniel be at the Hartwell Gala tonight, where the Navy suit were going to fix this." His first instinct was to refuse. "Mother," he said, "don't do this. Whatever you're planning, don't." "I'm not planning anything, darling. I'm simply going to make sure the truth gets told for once. That woman has ruined us, and everyone's been too dazzled by her money to see it. Tonight they'll see." "There is no version of tonight where this goes the way you think it will," Daniel said. "I know her mother. You don't. You never bothered to. I lived with her for 5 years, and I didn't know her, and even I can tell you that whatever you're about to do, she's already 3 steps ahead of you." "Be there, Daniel," Victoria's voice hardened. "For once in your life, stand up for your family instead of moping in that pathetic little apartment. Be there." And he had gone. Not because he believed in what she was planning. He had gone because he knew with a sick certainty that if he didn't, his mother would do something unforgivable, and he wanted for once to be in the room when it happened. He didn't know yet what he would do when it did. He only knew he couldn't hide from it anymore. He had spent his whole life hiding from the moments that mattered, and it had cost him everything, and he was tired of it. He arrived late and stood at the back near the doors in a navy suit that no longer felt like armor. He saw his mother across the room holding court at a table near the front, radiant and terrible, laughing too loudly, touching the arms of important men, laying her trap in plain sight. And then he saw Sophia. She was at the Aurelia table near the center of the room, surrounded by people who clearly respected her, and she was not performing and she was not nervous, and when her eyes swept the room and passed over him, they did not stop. There was no anger in her face when she saw him. There was nothing at all. He had become to her a piece of furniture. And that somehow hurt worse than hatred would have. Hatred would have meant he still occupied space in her heart. This was the look you give a stranger's empty chair. The dinner came and went. Daniel could not eat a single bite. He watched his mother the way you watch a fire you know is going to spread, and he watched Sophia, who ate calmly and spoke warmly with the people at her table, and seemed impossibly to be the most relaxed person in the room. He didn't understand it. He didn't understand how she could be so calm when a trap was closing around her. It would be hours before he understood that she was calm, precisely because she knew the trap was there and had decided long ago to walk into it on purpose. Then came the moment the Foundation's chairman took the stage to thank the sponsors, and Sophia was invited up to say a few words on behalf of Aurelia, as she did every year, and she rose from her table to a round of warm applause. And that was when Victoria Whitmore stood up. "Before Ms. Bennett speaks," Victoria called out in a voice pitched to carry to every corner of the room, "I think the people here deserve to know exactly who they're applauding." The room quieted. Heads turned. The photographers at the back lifted their cameras. This was the scene Victoria had promised them, and they had come to collect. Sophia stopped halfway to the stage. She did not look alarmed. She turned slowly toward the source of the voice with the patient expression of a woman who had been expecting this exact interruption and was almost relieved it had finally arrived. "Go on, Ms. Bennett, take your applause," Victoria said, and the venom in it was open now, sharpened by 10 days of humiliation. "But while you all clap for this generous, respectable woman, ask yourselves how she built her reputation. This woman spent 5 years lying to my son. She concealed her identity. She hid a fortune from her own husband. She wormed her way into a good family, pretended to be a humble little wife who cooked dinner and wore cheap dresses. And all the while she was worth billions, and she used that hidden money to manipulate everyone around her. And when it suited her, she divorced my son and seized his family's company out of pure spite." Victoria's voice rose trembling with a fury that had been building for 10 days. "That is who you are applauding. A liar, a manipulator, a woman who lies for a living." The room was dead silent. 600 people looked at Sophia. The cameras looked at Sophia. The reporters had their pens ready. And Victoria Whitmore stood there with the look of a woman who had just fired the shot she'd been aiming for 10 days, certain she had finally hit her mark. At his table near the front, Daniel closed his eyes. He could not watch. He was certain he was about to see Sophia destroyed, or worse, see her lash out and destroy his mother, and he did not know which would be more unbearable. Sophia looked at Victoria for a long moment. Then she walked to the stage. She did not walk quickly, and she did not walk slowly. She took the steps, and she stood at the microphone, and she waited. and the silence stretched until it was almost unbearable, and Victoria's confident expression began very slightly to falter because Sophia was not reacting the way a guilty woman reacts. She was not flustered. She was not defensive. She was reacting the way a woman reacts when she has been waiting 5 years for someone to finally hand her the microphone. "Thank you, Victoria," Sophia said. The room did not know what to make of that. A confused murmur rippled through the tables. "No, I mean it. Thank you." Sophia's voice was clear and calm and carried effortlessly through the silent room. "For 5 years you've told this story about me in every room I wasn't allowed to speak in. At your dinners, at weddings, behind my back at parties in the ears of everyone who mattered to you, and I never once got to answer. So thank you, Victoria, for finally telling it to my face in a room where I can." She turned to the 600 guests. "My name is Sophia Bennett. I'm the founder of Aurelia Global Holdings. That part of her story is true. I do have a great deal of money, and I did hide it during my marriage. That part is also true." She let it land unashamed. "So let me tell you the part she left out. Let me tell you why." And she told them. She told them plainly and without drama about the men before Daniel, the ones who found out what she was worth and changed overnight. The ones who stopped seeing a woman and started seeing an amount. She told them what it was like to sit across a table from someone and never know not once whether they loved you or loved your bank account. She told them about a proposal she'd received at 26 from a man she'd nearly said yes to, until she overheard him on the phone describing her to a friend as the smartest acquisition I'll ever make. She had not been a woman to him. She had been a merger. After that, Sophia said, I stopped telling people who I was, not to deceive anyone, to protect the one thing I was starting to believe I'd never have, the chance to be loved for myself. A stillness had settled over the room now, deeper than the shocked silence of a moment before. This was the silence of 600 people who had come for a scandal and were getting something they had not expected, something that was making a number of them profoundly uncomfortable because they recognized their own world in it and did not entirely like the reflection. "And then I met a young man who taught a free business class at a community college," Sophia went on, "who stayed late to help a nervous student understand cash flow, who never once asked what I drove or where I lived or what my family was worth." Her voice softened. "I married that man because he didn't know, and for a little while it was the only honest relationship I'd ever had. He loved a woman who cooked dinner and wore department store dresses. He loved someone he thought had nothing." She paused. "Do you know how rare that is for someone like me, to be loved by a person who thinks you have nothing to give them but yourself? I would have traded every dollar I had for that. I nearly did." Daniel at his table had gone very still. Because she was talking about him, she was telling 600 people the story of the best thing he had ever been before he ruined it, and she was telling it with a tenderness that made his chest ache. "So no, Victoria," Sophia said, turning back toward the Whitmore table. "I didn't lie for a living. I stayed silent so that once in my life I could find out if I was lovable without a fortune attached to me." Her eyes settled on Victoria's face. "And then you came into your son's life, and you spent 5 years telling him I wasn't good enough, and I heard every word of it through every wall at every dinner. You thought I couldn't hear you. I heard all of it. And the worst part, the part I'll carry the rest of my life, is that it worked. You turned the one man who ever loved me for myself into a man who was ashamed of me. And I let it happen because I kept hoping every single day that he'd wake up before it was too late." Sophia's voice did not break, but something in it went very quiet, and 600 people leaned in to catch it. "You want to talk about who seized whose company," she said. "Let's talk about it. 3 years ago, Whitmore Industries was 19 days from bankruptcy. 1,100 people were about to lose their jobs. Machinists, truck drivers, women in the front office who'd worked there 30 years. And an anonymous investor stepped in and saved every single one of those jobs and never asked for credit and never told a soul." She paused. "That investor was me. I saved your company, Victoria, quietly, from the shadows, while you were standing in the light telling everyone I wasn't good enough to be in it." A murmur moved through the room like wind through tall grass, At his table, Daniel saw a woman 2 seats over put her hand to her mouth. And 10 days ago, Sophia continued, that same company was 19 days from bankruptcy again. Not because of me, because of a boat that never carried a paying client, because of trips to Monaco charged to the company as business development, because of consulting fees paid to your own friends for reports nobody ever read. Because of 18 months of spending money, the company did not have to look richer than you actually were. Her eyes did not leave Victoria's face, which had gone the color of the tablecloth. So when the collapse finally came, I had a choice. I could let the banks take it and sell it for parts and let 1,100 families lose everything. Or I could buy it, keep it whole, keep every single job, and put a real operator in charge. She spread her hands. I chose the workers, again. I have chosen the workers of your family's company over my own comfort 3 separate times now, Victoria. And every single time, you have called me a manipulator for it. She let it sit. The silence was enormous. You called me the woman who lies for a living, Sophia said. But I'm not the one who's been lying. You spent 5 years pretending to be rich with money that wasn't yours in a company you didn't build, that you abandoned when it was failing, and only came back to the day it turned a profit. You are the performance, Victoria. I was just the woman quietly paying for it. And then the silence broke. Not into shouting, into something far worse for Victoria. Into the low rising sound of 600 people turning in a single moment against the person they had been ready 10 minutes earlier to see humiliated. It was the sound of an entire room changing its mind at once, and Victoria Whitmore, who had spent her whole life reading rooms, heard it happen, heard the tide go out from under her, and knew she had lost, and her face in front of every camera in the city crumpled. That's a lie, Victoria said. But her voice had no floor under it now. She's twisting everything. She's none of that as Daniel. She spun toward the back of the room, toward her son, and her voice cracked into something raw and desperate. Daniel, tell them. Tell them the truth about her. Tell them what she did to you. Daniel, for God's sake, say something. And every head in that enormous room turned toward the front, toward the man in the navy suit who had risen halfway out of his chair. The man who had once handed his wife divorce papers in front of 200 people and now stood exposed in front of 600, with his mother begging him to lie and his ex-wife standing on the stage, having just told nothing but the truth. Daniel Carter stood frozen. This was the moment. He understood it, completely understood it in his bones. His whole life had been building to a single choice, made 1,000 small times, in 1,000 small ways, and never once faced head-on. And now here it was, dragged into the open, under the lights in front of everyone who had ever mattered to him. His mother wanting him to lie one more time, Sophia wanting nothing from him at all. And a room full of the people whose approval he had spent his entire adult life chasing, waiting to see which man he really was underneath. He thought of the boat. He thought of Monaco. He thought of Ted flagging the debt 4 times while he told him to stop being a pessimist. He thought of a kitchen table at 2 a.m. and a hand holding his and a voice saying, "Whatever happens, we build it back together." He walked forward. Every step took him past a table of watching faces. He did not look at them. He looked at his mother, who was gazing at him with a terrible, desperate hope, certain that her son, her Daniel, the boy she had shaped and steered and controlled his whole life, would come to her rescue, as he always had. And then he looked at Sophia, who watched him with no expectation at all, because she had already learned the hardest possible way exactly who he was. Daniel reached the front of the room. He did not go to his mother. He turned to face the 600 guests, and he took a breath, and his voice, when it came, was not steady, but it was true. "Everything she just said is the truth," Daniel said. Victoria made a sound like she'd been struck. "Every word of it." Daniel went on louder now, because he could feel his courage failing, and he had to get it out before it did. "She saved our company 3 years ago and never told me. She married me when I had nothing, and she never asked for a single thing, and she loved me before I was anyone at all." His voice cracked, and he pushed through it. "And I divorced her, in front of 200 people, at a party, because my mother told me she wasn't good enough for me, and I was weak enough, and vain enough, and stupid enough to believe it." He turned and looked directly at Victoria now. "You've been telling that woman she wasn't good enough since the day you came back into my life. And I want to know something, Mother. Where were you when the bank called our loan? Where were you the night we almost lost everything? You were gone? You'd been gone for 20 years. She was the one sitting at that kitchen table with me, not you." His voice shook. "You came back when the money came back, and the first thing you did was teach me to be ashamed of the only person who stayed. Daniel!" Victoria's voice was a whisper now, all the fury drained out of it, leaving only fear. "What are you doing? What are you doing to me?" "For once in my life, Mother," Daniel said, "I'm telling the truth." He turned to Sophia, and in front of 600 people and every camera in the city, Daniel Carter said the thing he should have said 3 years ago at a kitchen table at 2 a.m. when a woman held his hand and promised they'd build it back together. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know it doesn't fix anything. I know it's years too late and it doesn't undo one single thing I did to you. But I need to say it where everyone can hear it, because you had to hear the lies where everyone could hear them for 5 years and never got to answer. So let me answer for you just this once." His eyes were wet now openly. "I'm sorry, Sophia. You were never a temporary chapter. You were the whole book. You were the only true thing in my life. And I couldn't read it because I was too busy performing for people who forgot my name the day my money ran out." The room was silent. Not a fork moved. Sophia looked at him from the stage for a long moment. And whatever anyone in that room expected, whether they expected her to soften or to weep or to run into his arms or to strike back one final time, what she actually did was none of those things. She simply nodded once slowly the way you acknowledge something true. "Thank you, Daniel," she said quietly, and the microphone carried it to every corner. "I waited 3 years to hear you say that. Not the sorry, the other part, that you finally see it." A pause. "I'm glad I got to hear it. I didn't think I ever would." "Sophia," Daniel started, and there was something in his voice, some fragile rising hope, the beginning of a man about to ask for a second chance. "No," Sophia said gently before he could finish, and it was not cruel. It was almost kind, which made it final in a way that anger never could have. Don't ask me, because I know what you're about to ask, and if you ask it, one of us is going to have to say no out loud in front of all these people, and I don't want that for either of us." She looked at him with something that was not love anymore, but was not hatred either. It was something cleaner than both. "What you said tonight, you didn't say it to win me back. You said it because it was true, and the truth deserved to be spoken out loud at least once. That's enough. Let it be enough. Let that be the thing we end on instead of 5 years of silence." Daniel's throat worked. He looked at her, and something in his face finally fully understood, and he nodded and he stepped back and he let her go, which was in the end the first genuinely unselfish thing he had done in front of her in years. "I hope you find your way," Sophia said. "I mean that, Daniel, I really do. But you'll find it without me. You have to. That's the whole point of it." And then she turned back to the room, to the 600 people who had come expecting a scandal, and had instead watched something none of them would forget, and she finished the speech she had actually come there to give. "I didn't plan to say any of this tonight," Sophia said. "I came here like I do every year to talk about the foundation's work and to write a check, so let me do that." She smiled, and it was the first real smile she'd allowed herself all evening. Aurelia Global is committing $4 million this year to the Hartwell Foundation's scholarship program for young people who have nothing, who come from nowhere, who wear the wrong clothes and don't know the right people and haven't got a name that opens a single door. Her voice was warm now and steady and utterly her own. "Because I was one of those people once, long before the money, and somebody gave me a chance when I had nothing to offer but myself and a lot of stubbornness. That's the only kind of investment I've ever really believed in. Not the boats, not the parties. People, just people." The applause did not start politely. It started as a single pair of hands somewhere near the front, and then it built and built until 600 people were on their feet, and the sound of it filled the enormous room and rolled toward the stage in a wave. And it was not for the $4 million, and everyone in that room knew it wasn't. It was for the woman who had walked into a trap built specifically to destroy her and turned it In the space of 10 minutes, and without ever once raising her voice into the truest thing anyone present had heard in years. And in the middle of that standing ovation, Victoria Whitmore stood alone at her table, unapplauded, unlooked at, entirely invisible. She was experiencing for the first time in her life the precise thing she had spent 5 years doing to another woman. No one turned to her. No one met her eyes. The important men whose arms she had touched an hour ago now had their backs to her on their feet, clapping for someone else. She had come to make Sophia disappear in front of the whole city, and instead, she was the one who had vanished. And she stood there in the roar of applause meant for another woman, and understood at last in her own body exactly what it felt like to be treated as though you were no one at all. Her hands were shaking. She reached for her wine glass and knocked it, and it fell, and no one noticed because no one was looking at her. And that more than anything was the moment Victoria Whitmore understood that it was over. Not just the company, not just the money. Her whole way of moving through the world, the entire machinery of status and appearance she had spent a lifetime operating had just stopped working in front of 600 witnesses, and it was never going to work again. Daniel did not clap. He stood at the front of the room near the stage, and he watched the woman he had thrown away receive the love of an entire room, and he felt no bitterness, which surprised him. He had expected to feel bitter. Instead, he felt only a vast, quiet grief, the grief of a man who finally sees clearly the true size of what he lost and knows there is no getting it back, and understands somewhere deep down that this is exactly as it should be, that she had earned every clap of those 600 pairs of hands, and that he had earned his solitude at the front of the room just as surely. When the applause finally faded and the evening moved on, Sophia stepped down from the stage and people crowded around her, reporters and donors and strangers who wanted only to be near her for a moment, and she was gracious with all of them, and at no point did she look back at Daniel again. He understood that too. He had gotten his one moment. He had said the true thing out loud in front of everyone, and she had accepted it, and that was the end of it. There would be no scene in a hallway where she took his hand. There would be no second chance whispered under the lights. She had closed the book gently and completely, and she was not going to open it again for him. And the mercy of it was that she had let him close it too, instead of slamming it in his face. Daniel walked out of the gala alone into the night past the photographers who no longer had the slightest interest in him, and he loosened his tie and he stood on the sidewalk in the cold for a moment and took Sophia's letter out of his pocket. He didn't read it. He had it memorized now, every word. He just held it. Behind him in the bright, loud room, his mother was gathering her things with shaking hands, abandoned by the very crowd she had tried to weaponize. His father was nowhere to be found. Harold had quietly left before the speeches, unable to watch. And the Whitmore name, which Victoria had spent her entire life polishing until it gleamed, had just been spoken for the last time in that city as anything but a cautionary tale, a story people would tell at other galas for years. The night the proud woman tried to destroy the quiet one and destroyed only herself. And somewhere in the center of all that light and noise, Sophia Bennett was laughing softly at something a stranger had said, free of every last one of them, at last having finally, after 5 years of enforced silence, spoken every true thing she'd been carrying, and set it down, and walked away lighter than she had felt, in longer than she could remember. The story of the gala did not stay in the room. Of the gala. By the next morning, it was everywhere. One of the columnists Victoria had so carefully cultivated, the ones she'd fed her story to for 10 days, wrote the piece of her life. But it was not the piece Victoria had ordered. The headline read roughly that a proud family had tried to publicly shame a woman they'd underestimated for 5 years and had instead destroyed themselves in front of the entire city. The article named names. It named the boat. It named Monaco. It named the 1,100 workers Sophia had quietly saved, while the Whitmores called her worthless. And it ended with a line that would follow Victoria for the rest of her days, that the only person Victoria Whitmore had ever successfully made disappear was herself. Victoria did not leave her house for 2 weeks after that. But this part of the story is not about Victoria. She had made her choices, and the city had made its judgment, and there was nothing left in her but the slow, bitter work of living with both. This part of the story is about her son and what a man does with himself after he has lost absolutely everything and can no longer blame a single soul but the one in the mirror. Because in the weeks that followed, Daniel Carter's life did not slowly improve. It got harder. It got harder in every way a life can get harder. And the strangest part, the part he could not have explained to anyone, was that some quiet thing inside him was almost grateful for it. The last of the money went first. The lawyers took their share of what was left after the acquisition, and the debts he'd personally guaranteed took the rest. And within a month of the gala, Daniel Carter, who had once spent $400,000 on a boat to impress men whose names he could no longer remember, sat at a kitchen table in a rented apartment and did the math on whether he could afford both the electric bill and groceries in the same week. He could not. He chose the groceries. He learned to keep the lights off in the evenings and to feel his way to the bed in the dark, and he told himself it saved money, which it did. But the truth underneath the truth was that in the dark, no one could see him, and there was something in that he needed just then. He looked for work. This was its own education. Daniel Carter had a resume that said he'd run a company, and for the first 2 weeks, he applied to positions that matched that resume: executive roles, director roles, positions with corner offices and expense accounts, and he heard nothing back, not a single reply. He didn't understand it at first. Then a former contact, one of the few who still took his calls, told him the truth over the phone, bluntly, almost gently. "Daniel, nobody's going to hire you at that level. You know that, right? The story's out there. Everybody in the city read it. You didn't just lose a company, you lost a company that a billion-dollar firm had to rescue from your spending. No board is going to put you in charge of anything. I'm sorry. I'm telling you this because somebody should." Daniel sat with the phone against his ear for a long moment after the man hung up. Then he stopped applying to those jobs. The next week, he walked into a small hardware store 6 blocks from his apartment, a family-owned place with dusty shelves and a hand-painted sign because there was a card in the window that said they needed help, and he asked the owner if the position was still open. The owner was a man named Sal, somewhere in his 60s, with forearms, like a man who had actually worked his whole life, and he looked at Daniel's soft hands and his good shoes, which were the last good thing Daniel owned, and he said not unkindly, "Son, this is stocking shelves and unloading trucks and helping old ladies find the right size screw. It's $12 an hour. You sure you're in the right place?" "Yes," Daniel said. "You ever done manual work in your life?" "No," Daniel said. And then, because he was tired of performing, tired down to his bones of pretending to be something he wasn't, he added, "I've never done anything real in my life. I'd like to start." Sal looked at him for a long moment. Something in the answer must have landed, because he grunted and jerked his head toward the back. "Truck comes at 6. Don't be late." Daniel was not late. He was never late, not once in all the months that followed. The work broke his body at first. His hands blistered and then bled, and then slowly over weeks turned hard. His back ached every night. He came home too tired to think, which was he discovered a kind of mercy, because when he was too tired to think, he was too tired to remember. And when he was too tired to remember, the wound in his chest went quiet for a few hours and let him sleep. And here was the thing that undid him in those first weeks. Not the poverty, not the aching back, it was the customers. Because at the hardware store, no one knew who he was. No one knew the Whitmore name. No one cared what his family had been, or what he had lost, or who his mother was, or that he had once owned a boat. The old women who came in looking for the right size screw did not care about any of it. They cared only about one thing, whether Daniel Carter was kind to them and helped them find what they needed. That was it. That was the whole measure of him now. Not his name, not his wealth, not his connections, just his actions, moment to moment, person to person. And for the first time in his adult life, Daniel Carter began to be judged on the only thing that had ever actually mattered, and he was terrified at first of what the verdict would be, because he had spent so many years being nothing but a name and a bank account that he genuinely did not know if there was a decent man underneath, or whether there had ever been. He found out slowly. He found out the day an elderly man came in confused, looking for a part to fix a leaking pipe and couldn't quite explain what he needed, and the other clerk was ready to wave him off. And Daniel instead spent 40 minutes with him and drew him a diagram and walked him through exactly what to buy and how to install it. And the old man left with tears in his eyes because his late wife used to handle these things, and he'd been too proud to admit he didn't know how. Daniel stood at the counter after the man left and realized his own eyes were wet, and he did not fully understand why, except that he had just done something kind for a stranger who could do nothing for him in return, expecting nothing back. And it was the first time in years he had done such a thing, and it had cost him nothing, and it had made him feel more like a person than any deal he'd ever closed. Sal noticed. Sal noticed everything. "You're all right, Carter," he said one evening, tossing Daniel a set of keys. "Lock up tonight. I trust you." "I trust you." 2 words. Daniel stood in the empty store after Sal left and held the keys and felt something in his chest that he had not felt in longer than he could remember, and it took him a moment to name it, and when he named it, he almost laughed because it was so small and so enormous at the same time. He had earned something, for real. Not bought it, not inherited it, not married into it. He had earned a man's trust with nothing but showing up on time and being decent day after day, and it was worth more to him standing alone in that closed hardware store than every dollar he had ever spent. Meanwhile, across the city, in a world Daniel no longer had any access to, Sophia Bennett was becoming something the newspapers had started calling a phenomenon. The gala had made her unwillingly into a public figure. She had spent her whole life avoiding exactly that, and now it had happened, and rather than fight it, she had made a decision that surprised even Emily. She had decided to use it. Aurelia Global, which for years had operated invisibly through holding companies and blind trusts, now had a face, and that face belonged to a woman with a story people could not stop telling. And Sophia, who had never wanted fame, discovered that fame was simply a tool no different from capital and could be pointed at problems and made to do work. So she pointed it. She launched a scholarship fund, and then a second one larger than the first. She funded the construction of community centers in the kinds of neighborhoods she had grown up in before the money, the neighborhoods everyone else forgot. She started a program that gave low-interest loans to first-time entrepreneurs who couldn't get a bank to look at them, women and immigrants and kids from nowhere, with nothing but an idea and a lot of stubbornness, the exact person she had been at 23. Emily watched all of it, and one evening going over the numbers, she finally said what she'd been thinking. "You could have destroyed them," she said quietly. "The Whitmores. After what they did. After what Victoria tried to do at the gala. You had every tool. You could have crushed them completely, put them on the street, salted the earth. Any court in the country would have understood. And instead, you're funding scholarships and building community centers." She looked up. Why not take the revenge you earned it?" Sophia was quiet for a moment. "Because revenge would have made me into her," she said finally. "That's the trap, Emily. That's the trap Victoria never saw. She thought the point of having power was to make other people feel small. She spent her whole life doing it, and it made her small. If I'd used everything I have to grind that family into the ground, I'd have won, and I'd have become exactly the thing I spent 5 years quietly enduring." She shook her head. "I didn't want to win against them. I wanted to be free of them. Those aren't the same thing. Winning still keeps you tied to the person you beat. Freedom means you don't think about them at all." "And do you," Emily asked, "think about them?" Sophia considered the question honestly. "Less every day," she said, "which is how I know it's working." But there was one of them she did still think about, though. She did not say so to Emily, and it was not Victoria, and it was not Harold. It was Daniel. Not with longing. That door was closed, and she had meant it when she closed it. But sometimes in a quiet moment she wondered what had become of him, whether the man who stood up at the gala and told the truth in front of 600 people had been a real man finally surfacing, or just a drowning one grabbing at the only honest thing left within reach. She got her answer by accident months later on a gray afternoon in the last place she would ever have expected. She had been visiting one of the community centers Aurelia funded, unannounced, the way she liked to do it, without press, without an entourage. Just Sophia in plain clothes, wanting to see the real thing instead of a report about it. And afterward, driving back, she'd asked the driver to stop so she could pick up a few things, and she'd walked into a small hardware store 6 blocks from the center, a family-owned place with a hand-painted sign, because she needed a particular kind of hook for something at the center, and the big chains never had what she wanted. She was halfway down an aisle reading a package when she heard his voice. "Ma'am, can I help you find something?" She looked up, and there was Daniel Carter in a work apron, his hands rough and marked, standing in a hardware store aisle, asking his ex-wife if he could help her find something, and neither of them, for one long suspended moment, could make a single sound. His face went white, then red, then something more complicated than either. "Sophia," he said. It came out as barely a breath. "Daniel," she said. And she watched in real time the war that went across his face, the instinct to explain himself, to justify, to shrink, to make some excuse for the apron and the blistered hands and the $12 an hour job. She watched him get ready to perform, because performing was the only language he had ever really spoken, and then she watched him decide not to. "I work here," he said simply. No spin, no shame dressed up as pride, just the fact. "I stock the shelves and unload the trucks and help people find what they need. It's $12 an hour." He almost smiled, and there was something in it she had never seen on his face in 5 years of marriage. "It's the first honest thing I've ever done." Sophia looked at him for a long moment. "You look well," she said. And she meant it, which surprised her, because he did not look well in any way that world she'd left would have recognized. He looked tired. He looked poorer. But there was something in his eyes that had not been there before, some solidity, some ground under him, and it was the thing she'd spent 5 years waiting to see and had given up on ever seeing. Ever. "I'm not," Daniel said honestly. "Well, I mean, I'm broke. I keep the lights off to save money. My back hurts all the time." He shrugged, and again there was that ghost of an unfamiliar smile. "But I sleep. For the first time in years, I actually sleep. And I earned that hook you're holding in a way. Sal trusts me to lock up. That's more than anyone trusted me back when I had everything." He stopped. "Sorry, you didn't come here for my life story. Let me help you find what you need." And he did. He walked her to the right aisle and he found the exact hook she needed, and he was good at it, quietly competent in a way that had nothing to do with the man who used to bluff his way through boardrooms. And Sophia watched him and felt something she had not expected to feel, which was not love and was not pity, but was something like respect. At the register, he rang her up and she paid, and for a moment they both stood there. Two people who had once shared a bed and a life and a lie, now separated by a hardware store counter and a distance that could never be crossed again, and both of them knew it, and neither of them tried. "Can I say something?" Daniel said, "before you go. And then I'll never bother you again, I promise. I know I don't have the right to say anything to you ever again, but—" Sophia waited. "I found the letter," he said. "I mean, you gave me the letter at the tower, and I've read it about 1,000 times. His voice was steady, but his eyes were not. "You wrote that you didn't want to buy me a life. You wanted to build one with me, and I've been thinking about that every single day unloading those trucks, because that's exactly what I never understood the whole time. I thought love was something you acquired like a boat, like a table at a gala, something that made you look good to other people." He shook his head slowly. "You were trying to build something with me, and I couldn't even see it because I was too busy trying to buy things that would make my mother proud." He looked at her. "I'm not telling you this to get anything from you. I know that ship sailed a long time ago, and I know I'm the one who sank it. I'm telling you because you deserve to hear from me out loud that I finally understood the letter. That's all. That's the whole thing." Sophia looked at him for a long moment, and then she said something that she would think about later on the drive home, something that came out of her before she fully decided to say it. "You want to know the truth, Daniel?" she said quietly. "The man standing in front of me right now in this apron with those hands is more of a person than the man I was married to for 5 years. That man never once told me a true thing that cost him something. This one just did." She picked up her bag. "I'm not saying it to give you hope. There's no hope, not the kind you mean, and I think you know that. I'm saying it because it's true. And because I think you spent your whole life needing someone to tell you that you could be a real person, and no one ever did. So I'm telling you, you can be. It looks like you're already doing it." Daniel's throat worked. He couldn't speak. "Take care of yourself," Sophia said. "I mean that." And she walked out of the hardware store and got into her car and did not look back, because she had learned long ago that looking back was Victoria's disease, and she had no intention of catching it. But she thought about him on the drive home, not with longing, with something closer to peace, because for 5 years she had carried a small secret grief. Not just that Daniel had failed her, but that maybe she had been wrong about him from the very beginning, that maybe the kind man who'd helped a nervous student with a spreadsheet had never really existed at all, that maybe she had loved a performance and nothing more. And now she knew. That man had existed. He'd just been buried for years, under a mountain of his mother's ambition and his own vanity and a whole world's worth of the wrong values. And it had taken losing every single thing to dig him back out. But he was there, in an apron, helping old women find the right size screw, sleeping through the night for the first time in years. She would never go back to him. That part was over, and had been over for a long time. But she realized glad he existed, glad the real man had finally surfaced, even if it came far too late for the two of them. Back at the hardware store, Daniel Carter stood at the counter for a long time after her car pulled away. Then he took Sophia's letter out of his apron pocket where he'd taken to carrying it, and he did not read it because he had it memorized every word. He just held it. And he thought about what she'd said. "You can be a real person. It looks like you're already doing it." Sal came out from the back and found him standing there. "You okay, Carter? You look like you saw a ghost." Daniel put the letter away. "I did," he said. "Sort of. I saw the best person I ever knew, and she told me I was becoming someone worth being." He picked up a box of stock and hefted it onto his shoulder, and his back ached, and his hands were rough, and he had nothing to his name, and he found standing in that small store with nothing left that he was closer to all right than he had been in years. "Come on, that truck's not going to unload itself." And he got back to work. Months passed, the seasons turned, and slowly, without any single dramatic moment, without a rescue or a reversal or a fortune restored, Daniel Carter built a life. Not a big one, not one that would ever impress the people who had abandoned him, but a real one made of small, honest things. Sal made him assistant manager. He started teaching a free class again on weekends at the community center 6 blocks away, the one Aurelia funded, though he never knew that, helping people who wanted to start tiny businesses understand cash flow, which was the one thing he'd always genuinely known how to do back before he forgot who he was. He was good at it. The people in his class adored him. And he never once in any of those classes mentioned that he had once owned a company, because that man was gone and he did not miss him. He never remarried. He didn't look for it. Some part of him understood that he had already had the great love of his life and had thrown it away with both hands, and that a man does not get 2 of those and does not deserve to. But he was not bitter about it. He had made his peace with the size of what he'd lost. He carried the letter, and he did his work, and he was kind to strangers who could do nothing for him, and it was in the end enough. It was more than the man he used to be had ever managed to be. And on the rare nights when the old grief surfaced, when he lay in the dark in his small apartment with the lights off to save money, and let himself remember the woman who had held his hand at a kitchen table and promised they'd build it back together, he did not wish for her back. He had given up that wish, and giving it up had set him free. He only wished quietly into the dark that she was happy. Across the city she was. She was happier than she had been in years, and getting happier and building something real, and slowly, day by day, thinking about the Whitmores less and less exactly as she had told Emily she would. 2 people on 2 sides of a city who had once shared a life. One who had lost everything and found himself. One who had lost the illusion of love and found her freedom. Both of them, for the first time in years, becoming exactly who they were supposed to be, in the quiet, unglamorous, entirely separate lives they were each finally, honestly living. 5 years is a long time, long enough to build something real, and long enough to become someone new, and long enough to prove beyond any doubt exactly who a person truly is. For Sophia Bennett, those 5 years were the fullest of her life. Aurelia Global did not just grow, it transformed. Under Sophia's public leadership, the empire she had once run from the shadows became something the business schools started studying, not for its profits, though the profits were enormous, but for the way it made them. She had built a company that measured itself by more than money, that kept its workers through downturns when its competitors were cutting, that put a percentage of everything it earned into the neighborhoods everyone else had written off. And she had done it without ever once becoming cruel, without ever becoming the thing she had escaped, and that more than the billions was what people could not stop talking about. The scholarship fund she had announced at the Hartwell Gala on the night everything changed had put thousands of young people through school by now. Thousands. Kids from nowhere with the wrong clothes and no connections who now had degrees and careers and lives their parents could never have imagined. And every single one of them had gotten there because a woman who had once been told she wasn't good enough had decided that the measure of a person was never what they showed the world. But the thing that had surprised everyone, including Sophia herself, was not the company and was not the charity. It was that she had fallen in love, really in love, for the first time in her life. His name was David Okonkwo, and he was in every way that mattered the opposite of everything Sophia had escaped. He was a professor. He taught engineering at a public university, and he had spent his career turning down more lucrative offers because he believed in teaching kids who couldn't afford the private schools. He was not rich. He would never be rich. And when Sophia met him at a scholarship event where he had come to speak on behalf of a student he'd mentored, he had no idea who she was. That was the part she'd loved most in the beginning. He didn't know. They had talked for 2 hours that night about his students, about her scholarship program, about everything except money and status and the world she'd left behind. And near the end of the night, he'd asked a little shyly if he could see her again, and he'd said, "I have to be honest with you, I don't have much. I teach, that's it. But I'd very much like to take you to dinner somewhere modest if you'd let me." And Sophia had almost laughed and almost cried because it was the exact thing she'd once given up everything to find a person who wanted her before they knew what she was worth. And here it was offered so simply by a man who thought he had nothing to offer but himself. She had told him the truth on their third date, all of it. Who she was, what she owned, the whole staggering size of it. She'd told him because she had learned her lesson the hardest possible way, and she was never again going to build a relationship on a thing left unsaid. And David had gone very quiet for a long moment, and then he'd said, "Well, that changes exactly one thing." "What?" Sophia had asked, her heart in her throat, braced for the change she'd seen in every man before Daniel. "It means," David had said slowly, "that you have absolutely no reason to be with someone like me, and you're choosing to anyway, which means you must actually like me, which is honestly the best news I've had in years." And then he'd smiled and said, "I'm still paying for dinner, though. I know it's not much next to what you've got, but it matters to me. Is that all right?" And Sophia had reached across the table and taken his hand, and she had known right then with a certainty she had never once felt in 5 years of marriage to Daniel Carter, that she had finally found what she'd been looking for her entire life. They married quietly 2 years after the gala. No press, no spectacle. A small ceremony with the people who actually mattered, Emily, standing beside her David students filling half the seats. And in the years that followed, they had built the things Sophia had once written about in a letter to a man who couldn't read it. Not a life she bought, a life they built, together, as equals, with nothing hidden. They had 2 children now, and Sophia Bennett, who had once lived alone in a small house, pretending to have nothing, who had once signed divorce papers in front of 200 people without shedding a single tear, now had a life so full and so warm and so genuinely happy that she sometimes had to stop in the middle of an ordinary evening and simply take it in because it seemed impossible that she had ended up here after everything. She had found someone who knew her favorite memories, who knew her fears, the real ones, the ones about being loved for the wrong reasons that had haunted her whole life, who knew her dreams and had made some of them come true and had dreams of his own that she got to help build. She had found in the end exactly what she'd told the whole city she was looking for on the night she stood on a stage and refused to be shamed. She had found someone who loved Sophia Bennett, not her billions, her. And on a quiet spring evening 5 years after the gala, in a life she could never have imagined, that story of hers reached by pure chance a small restaurant on the other side of the city, where a man sat alone at a table near the back, watching a television mounted above the counter. Daniel Carter was 46 years old now, and he looked it, and he did not mind. The hardware store had become his life in a way he could never have predicted. Sal had retired 3 years ago and had no children of his own to leave the place to, and one afternoon he'd sat Daniel down and said gruffly, the way he said everything, "I've been watching you for 4 years, Carter. You show up. You're honest. You treat every person who walks through that door like they matter. I don't know what your life was before you walked in here, and I don't care, but I know who you are now, and I want you to have this place. I'll finance it. You pay me back over 10 years whatever you can. It's yours." And Daniel Carter, who had once owned a multi-million-dollar company and lost it, had wept openly at a hardware store counter over a small business worth a fraction of what he'd thrown away, because it was the first thing he'd ever been given by someone who saw exactly who he was and gave it to him anyway. He owned the store now. He'd expanded it carefully, honestly, one modest step at a time. He still taught the free class at the community center on weekends, and he was good at it, and his students loved him. And over the years, a few of them had gone on to start real businesses of their own. And every single time one of them succeeded, Daniel felt something he had never once felt back when he was buying boats and flying to Monaco. He felt useful. He felt like his life had touched another life and made it better. He felt, in a word, he would once have found embarrassing good. He never remarried. He'd made his peace with that years ago, but he was not alone, not really. He had Sal, who came by the store most mornings just to sit and complain about the coffee. He had his students. He had a whole neighborhood full of people who knew him and trusted him and waved when he walked down the street, people who had no idea he had ever been anyone but the honest man who ran the hardware store and would stay late to help you figure out a leaky pipe. He had even slowly made his peace with his family. His father, Harold, had left Victoria a year after the gala, unable to keep living beside a woman so consumed by her own bitterness, and had come quietly to find his son. And Daniel had let him in. The two of them had rebuilt something slowly over years, a real relationship, the kind they'd never had when there was money and status in the way. Harold spent his last years genuinely proud of his son, not for anything he owned, but for the man he'd become. And when Harold died peacefully, 2 years before that spring evening, Daniel had held his hand, and there had been nothing left unsaid between them. Victoria Daniel had not seen in years. She had grown more bitter, not less poisoned by a grievance she nursed, and would not release blaming everyone to the end, but herself. Daniel had tried twice to reach her. Both times she had spent the entire conversation raging about Sophia, about the injustice done to their family, about the money that should have been theirs. And Daniel had finally understood that his mother was never going to change, that she had chosen her bitterness over her son, the same way she'd once chosen status over decency, and that there was nothing he could do to save her from herself. He had let her go, gently, with grief, but without guilt. Some people you cannot rescue, no matter how much you love them, because they will not put down the thing that's killing them. So on that spring evening, Daniel Carter sat alone in a small restaurant, tired in the good way. A man is tired after an honest day's work, eating a modest dinner, and he looked up at the television above the counter, and there she was, Sophia. The story was about a new education center she was opening, the largest one yet, a place for young entrepreneurs from nothing kids like the ones in his own weekend class. And there she stood, cutting a ribbon, surrounded by beaming young people whose lives she had changed. And beside her stood a tall, kind-faced man with his hand resting gently on her back, and beside them stood 2 children. And Sophia was laughing at something one of the kids had said, her head thrown back, entirely unguarded, entirely happy. Daniel set down his fork. He watched her for a long moment, and he waited for the pain to come, the old grief, the knife in the chest he had carried for so long. And it did not come. Instead, what came was something he could never have predicted on that terrible night 5 years ago when he'd handed her divorce papers. What came watching the woman he'd thrown away stand there radiant and free and loved by someone who deserved her was a deep, quiet, uncomplicated gladness. She was happy. She was so clearly completely happy, happier than she had ever been in 5 years of marriage to him, and he knew it. And rather than break him, it healed something in him he hadn't known was still broken. Because for years, underneath everything, some small guilty part of him had feared that he had ruined her too, that by throwing her away he had damaged her, dimmed her, taken something from her she'd never get back. And here was the proof on a television screen in a small restaurant that he hadn't. That she had not just survived him. She had flourished past him, gone on to a life so much larger and warmer and truer than anything he could ever have given her. And the best thing he had ever done for Sophia Bennett, he understood now, was to let her go, even though he'd done it for all the wrong reasons. "You look happy," he said quietly to the television, to no one. "Good, that's good." And he meant it. Every word of it, without reservation. And in the meaning of it, he understood how far he had actually come, because the Daniel Carter of 5 years ago could never have looked at that screen and felt anything but loss. This man felt only gratitude. Gratitude that she was happy. Gratitude that he had known her at all, even if he'd been too blind to know what he was holding. Gratitude that in throwing her away, he had somehow, by pure undeserved luck, set her free to find the life she should have had all along. He finished his dinner. He left a good tip, more than he could really afford, because the young woman waiting tables reminded him of the kids in his class, and he wanted her to have a good night. And he walked home through streets that knew him, past people who waved, to the small apartment above his hardware store, the store that was his, that he had earned, that no one could ever take from him, because he had built it out of nothing but honesty and showing up. And that night before he slept, Daniel Carter did something he had done nearly every night for 5 years. He took out Sophia's letter. The paper was soft, now worn thin at the folds from 1,000 openings. He could no longer read some of the words. They'd faded where his thumbs had held it. But he didn't need to read them. He knew every one. "I don't want to buy you a life. I want to build one with you. Choose me, Daniel. Not the money, me." He held it for a long moment, this letter from a woman who had offered him everything on a night he'd been too small to receive it. And then for the first time in 5 years, he understood that he did not need to carry it anymore. He understood at last that the letter had done its work. It had taught him the lesson it was written to teach, though it had taken losing everything to learn it. He knew now what Sophia had known all along, what she'd tried to give him in that letter, and what he'd been too blind to take. He knew that a person's worth was never the clothes they wore, or the money they had, or the name they carried into a room. He knew that the most valuable thing in his entire life had once sat quietly across a kitchen table from him, holding his hand at 2 a.m, asking for nothing, loving him for no reason at all except that she did, and that he had looked at the most valuable thing in the world and called it not good enough because he had been too small to understand what he was looking at. He had learned it, finally. Completely. Too late to save the marriage, but not too late to save the man. And so that night, Daniel Carter folded the letter one last time, and he placed it in a small wooden box where he kept the few things that mattered, and he closed the lid gently, the way you close a door on a room you finally finished grieving. He did not throw it away. He would never throw it away. But he no longer needed to carry it against his heart every hour of every day, because the lesson had moved from the paper into the man, and it lived in him now, in how he treated every person who walked through his door, in how he showed up in the honest, quiet life he had built out of the ruins of the false one. Across the city, Sophia Bennett tucked her children into bed and kissed her husband and stood for a moment at the window of a home filled with a love she had spent her whole life searching for and had finally, against all odds, found. She did not think about Daniel Carter that night. She rarely thought about him at all anymore, and when she did, it was without pain, the way you remember a hard winter from the warmth of spring. She had told Emily years ago that freedom meant you don't think about them at all, and she had gotten there exactly as she'd said she would. She was free. She had been free for a long time. And so their two stories, which had once been tangled into one, came finally and fully to rest each in its own place, each exactly where it belonged. Because here in the end is the truth this whole story was always about. Daniel Carter did not lose Sophia because she became powerful. He lost her because he failed to see her value when she was standing right beside him, plain and quiet and worth more than everything he was chasing. The woman he threw away became the woman an entire city came to respect, not because of her billions, but because of the very heart he'd been too blind to see. And the man who once believed he was trading a quiet wife for a better life discovered the hardest truth of all, far too late to change it, that the person he underestimated was the person he would spend the rest of his life having lost. But this is not a story about a man's regret. Regret is where small men stop. This is a story about what a person is actually worth, and that worth was never in the tailored suits or the boardroom or the billions. It was in the woman who sat quietly at a kitchen table at 2 a.m, holding the hand of a man who had nothing and promising him they would build it back together. She was extraordinary the entire time. She was extraordinary when they called her ordinary, extraordinary when they called her a temporary chapter. Extraordinary in every silent moment. She was underestimated by people too shallow to see what was right in front of them. And that is the one thing this story asks you never to forget. A person's worth is never determined by what they show the world. It is determined always and only by what they carry inside. The quiet ones, the ones who ask for nothing, the ones who love you before you're anyone at all. Look at them. See them. Because the person you underestimate today may very well be the finest soul you will ever be lucky enough to stand beside. And the greatest tragedy a human being can author is to hold something priceless in their hands, call it worthless, and let it go. Sophia Bennett was never the woman they thought she was. She was, from the very first day to the very last, the most valuable thing in every room she ever entered. And the only mistake anyone ever made was failing to see it.